Cards are like living, breathing human beings. I suppose because they give you real pleasure. You sit in a room with them for 10 or 15 hours a day, and they become your friends, particularly very lonely people.
If I could go back in history, and I can, the performer I would most like to see would be Johann Nepomuk Hofzinser, the famous Viennese card magician who called playing cards the poetry of magic. My favorite of his many experiments from the 19th century, an experiment called Everywhere and Nowhere. The question was to speak about the state of current magic in America. I know absolutely nothing about the 20th century. And I'm not just talking about magic. Vade. Jubio. Celerator.
Seven of diamonds.
The 7 of diamonds, from the 6 to the 7 of diamonds, and the gentleman on the end.
10 of spades.
The 10 of spades. There are probably more books written about magic than any other art form. Literally thousands and thousands of books, and I've collected thousands of books in my life about magic technique. But I believe that the real key to learning is personally. It's almost like the sensei-master relationship in the martial arts, that the way you want to learn is by someone that you respect showing you something. There's a level of transmission and a level of appreciation that's never completely attainable just through the written word. I've been really, really lucky to be around people and to feel very much part of this ongoing continuum of sleight of hand that can be traced back many, many years, more than a century.
It's beginners, ladies and gentlemen. Beginners, please. Everybody to beginners. Thank you. Yeah.
What do we do next?
I'll see you on the other side. All right.
A man named Canada Bill Jones, by all accounts, was the greatest Monte hustler who ever lived. Canada Bill was, of course, from England. In his day, the game was played with 3 identical cards, in this case, Queen of Hearts. And they would take out a marking crayon and put a big X on one of the queens, and you had to find the marked card, the queen with the X. Then a little later, they thought it was better to play with black cards. So instead, they played with 3 black cards, and they took out a pencil, a red pencil, and made a big circle so you could see it. And then they thought, well, you know, if you want to contrast them, all you have to do is play with a black one and a pair of queens. Then you don't need a pencil. Now they play with 1 queen and 2 black cards. So why don't you, we'll continue.
I remember going to a show of Ricky Jay and his 52 Assistants, and he said, boy, there were like 3 or 4 really big card sheets in the audience tonight. I said, wow. So guys, you know. I said, oh, yeah. Big, you know, card hustlers, and I said, so these guys gonna come backstage? He said, probably not. And they didn't. You know, but he does inhabit a world that you imagine that he would inhabit. He knows characters.
I was around magic all the time. It's my earliest memory. It's my earliest family memory. It's my earliest social memory. It's my earliest artistic memory, you know, so, it just was part of my being.
Newark Sunday News, New Jersey, March 14th, 1956. Two of a kind. Max Katz, past president of the Society of American Magicians, is about to be tricked by his 7-year-old grandson, Ricky Potash of Elizabeth, magician in his own right. Ricky hasn't given much thought to what he wants to be when he grows up, but one thing he doesn't want to be is a professional magician, which he is now at the age of 7. He made his first public appearance at the age of 4 at the New York Magicians' Picnic.
I remember doing this dreadful effect when I was 3 or 4 years old, producing cups from Lundy's, the seafood restaurant in Sheepshead Bay, which was terrible, and producing rubber fruit from a pan, which was awful. Pretending to lick a rubber ice cream cone, which I had just produced from the pan, which was awful. So within a year of that time, I think I was actually doing shows where I dressed up in a full tail suit and did more bad magical effects.
Here I have an empty canister. Keep your eye on it because strange things are going to happen. Sir, will you please bring in my magic bunny?
Well, the bunny jumped out. Will this be good? A little Peruvian guinea pig.
Oh.
I'll put it right in. I want to see this. This is really something. May I put it in for you, Ricky?
No.
Yes. It's in there now.
Rock-a-bye bunny, la la la. Well, my bunny has slept long enough. Time to wake him up. Oh, well, isn't magic wonderful?
I was a very comfortable performer from the beginning, and my guess is it's because I started at such a young age. My grandfather, Max Katz, was an amateur magician on a pretty serious level. He came over from Austria-Hungary as a small boy. He lived in Brooklyn, as did we. He had a Wall Street firm. He was a CPA through an act of Congress. He never went to college. And he had this interest in all sorts of fairly arcane things. As I think about it now, an enormous number of things that eventually wound up interesting me. But his path to these things was to take lessons from the best people he could find.
So he actually learned to play billiards from taking lessons from Willie Hoppe. And he took checker lessons from William Ryan, and then he wrote the introduction to his book on checkers. He was a cryptographer. He wound up becoming the cryptography editor of G-Man magazine. He used the code name of M.K. Dorigo. That was his moniker.
You know, he just found these people to teach him the things he was interested in. And at the point that I came around, I guess he was most interested in magic.
Abracadabra, March 1949. Slidini opens instruction studio. A steady demand on his time and his skill at teaching has caused him to open a studio for the instruction of local businessmen magicians.
So my grandfather actually took formal lessons from a bunch of magicians who were sensational. And then these people became his friends, and then became my early mentors. Slidini, Francis Carlyle, Di Vernon, Al Flasso, these people I got to see who were sensational. So, I mean, this was part of the great gift from my grandfather that I got at a very early age. I remember as a 5 or 6 year old, my grandfather would bring me over to Cardini's house, which was truly amazing because Cardini was known not to associate with very many magicians, you know, and he was just an extraordinary act. I only went to Cardini's twice. I was largely schmoozing with my grandfather, but kind enough to show me something. I mean, I still remember vividly him showing me a reverse fan that he made, you know, in this enormous circle of space, you know, the way he made this fan in his hand. Cardini was probably the greatest act I ever saw in my life.
As a treat, my grandfather brought me to a magic convention in Chicago when I was very young, and Cardini did the act. I think it was the last time he ever did his act, and it just was this extraordinary combination of elements blending together. The characterizations of him as the tipsy Englishman and his wife Swan as the page boy assistant, and the idea that these miracles just sort of happened to him. He didn't produce cards, cards appeared in his hand. He was desperate to get them out of his hand, and the second they got out of his hand, there were more cards in his hand. It just really transcended anyone else doing similar effects.
It's also something from an era that no longer exists, the end of vaudeville, in which you could make a living doing an act for a few minutes. You would just go from town to town, from, house to house, and do your act. And it just was wonderful. It was breathtaking.
There's a thing about holding cards in one's hand that's amazing. It becomes like a meditative tool, just sitting there and shuffling cards for hours and thinking about them. It's almost infinite what one can do with them.
My grandfather would have very specific commentaries on the performance of various magicians. For example, watching Slidini, he would say, look how wonderfully he misdirects attention. Watch his incredible ability to direct the attention of a spectator specifically where he wants to direct it.
Come close. I'm going to take the ball, I'm going to put it inside of the hand this way, and I close the hand. Squeeze. When I open the hand, you see the ball completely disappear. Come here, how close, watch, really slow. Come here, watch. Now do really slow, okay? All right? Watch now, really slow. See? And disappear. Nothing here, nothing here. Is anything in your pocket? No. No? Nothing. Oh, you didn't see, right? You know why? I did too fast. This time I do slow, really slow. Yeah. Just try to catch it. Watch. Now, I tell you why you didn't see. I explain to you, see? Before I put the ball this way, you couldn't see the ball, right? Why?
You're hiding it.
You're clever. You're clever. I hide it with the hand, right? But this time, I'm not going to put it this way. I'm going to put it this way. Come here, watch. Really slow. No more. Come here, watch. Really slow.
The famous story about misdirection is that there was a man named Abril Lamarck, who was the art editor of the New York Times and a very well-known amateur magician, and another friend of my grandfather's. He was a really flamboyant guy with a wonderful gray, twirled mustache, an elegant, dapper figure. And the story was told that one year at the art director's show in New York, a very famous show, that he was performing.
The effect involved a green handkerchief, which was in his hand, and he said that he was going to change color. You know, and his hands were completely empty except for this green handkerchief. And he tucked it into his hand, and at that moment, a completely nude, stunning model walked across the stage behind him. And then the first words he said were, "And now the handkerchief is yellow." And when people looked back, in fact, he had done this sleight of hand effect. So that illustrates perhaps more of the principles of magic than any other story with which I'm familiar.
I would go to see Slidini in his apartment in Manhattan and take lessons from him. How formal they were, I don't know. There was certainly no family decision. Now you'll take lessons from Slidini like it was Nadia Boulanger or something. I mean, you know, it was Slidini, and one day I was invited over to his home, and it was great. Slidini was an Italian man who lived this wonderfully poetic magic and was a wonderfully artistic fellow. I mean, he actually made me in those years. He was a wonderful tailor, and he made suits that were like Spanish toreador outfits, where every flower was dyed by hand and put on with sequins. And that's what I actually performed in when I was a young boy, 13 or 14, and, you know, with penciled-in sideburns. I then moved to New Jersey, so when I would come in to see Slidini, I would take a bus in from Elizabeth to Port Authority and then walk to Slidini's house. Slidini had this apartment on 45th Street. It was just really entering a world that was just so different and unusual. I still, you know, I can picture this vividly, sitting at this big table he had, and he would start running through this repertoire and actually specifically teaching me effects, like coins through the table, and making me practice and commenting on the practice. It was really fun. Practice to me was never anything but pleasure. It's what I like doing. If I'm frazzled, the nicest thing to calm me down is probably to put a deck of cards in my hand and let me sit down for a few hours.
I've worked very closely with Ricky many years. I directed 2 shows, 52 Assistants, and Ricky Jay on a Stem. I directed him, I think, 7 or 8 movies.
Trip aces. Beat him, my friend. Club flush. You owe me $6,000.
Thank you very much. Next case.
I would always say, you know, show me something. And so years ago, he said, okay, I'll show you a beginning effect. Off you go. When you can come back and do this effect better than anyone's ever done it, I'll show you another. And of course, worked on it for a while and got bored, and it wasn't my thing, and never did again. I mean, I respect the fact that the essence of his profession is secrecy and unobtainability. We all want to know how the trick is done. The technical skills to master them take a lifetime. To tell them to the uninitiated would be a desecration, so I stopped asking.
Secrecy in magic is still prevalent. There are many things that my mentors, I'm sure, didn't show me. There are probably even a couple of things I've come up with that I haven't shown anyone else, but... The code of secrecy thing clearly was instilled from the very beginning for me.
My grandfather would say,
when you watch Francis Carlyle, it's not only technique and presentation, but listen to the way that he explains an effect with such clarity that people go away knowing exactly what's happened.
I'm going to show you something very unusual. I'm never going to go near the deck. Take that Queen of Hearts and put it in your hand. And I put it in his hand. Now I'm going to show you something very unusual that you won't ever forget.
It was a wonderful piece of advice, because people are often confused in terms of what was even supposed to take place in a magic illusion. And Francis was great about letting you know what was supposed to happen and what did happen and why you should be excited about it. Francis was a serious alcoholic, and he had stopped drinking for years, and he went out to the Magic Castle in Los Angeles and had a number of very good years out there, and then eventually started drinking again. And I found him on the streets of LA shortly before he died, brought him home to stay with me for a few days in my apartment in Venice, and not long after that he was found on the streets. People frequently talk about how much more difficult it is to cheat in a card game than to perform good sleight of hand. But if you think about it, what makes magic different is that it's inherently honest. That's the major difference between deception as crime and deception as performance. In the performance of magic, in sleight of hand, you tell someone you're going to deceive them before you deceive them. That's really difficult, to tell someone you're going to fool them, to have them on guard and aware, and then to still fool them. It really is a very peculiar profession. I would go and visit Al Flasso. I would go to his shop on 34th Street, fairly often and watch him. He'd walk up this long, narrow staircase and open up the door. Al would be behind the counter. He was a very small man. I mean, he was barely past 5 feet tall, with these giant, thick glasses and this great grin, usually wearing shirt sleeves and suspenders, and just surrounded by this clutter. He got me interested in the history of the art as well. The first posters I ever bought were from Flasso. And he really did create one of the great personas of anybody performing magic, a Coney Island faker. He was just a great character coming from the Barker tradition, and he worked on the Sells Floto Circus. I think he worked at Algie Barnes. He really was a sideshow carnival magician out of Coney Island.
So now from the circus lots, Professor Al Flasso.
I remember him making Ed Sullivan truly laugh, which was almost unheard of.
Now coming up here, I'll show them how this is done. All you have to do is reach up in the air and get all you want. Grab one in a can. That's good. With the other hand in a can. That's better. Blow it in before you lose it. In your hand, my boy, look at this. Grab one. Put it in your pocket. Keep that for coming up here. I don't care for money. Did you get it? Let's see. That's what I thought. Hold that game with both hands. Well, thank you, my boy.
You literally cannot think about Al Flasso without smiling. And I suppose the only kind memory I ever had of my parents was that when it was time for my bar mitzvah, they asked me what I would like at the party, and I said I wanted Al Flasso to perform. And it was a pretty ballsy thing to ask for, in the sense that Flasso performed on the Ed Sullivan Show and often worked at Grossinger's and the Concord and the Catskills. And they inquired, and they came back to me and said that he was in fact working in the Catskills that weekend, and he sent his apologies but was unable to do it. And they were, conning me, and in fact had hired him, and he came. And so it was great to see Flasso perform for my friends, and they were as taken by him as I always had been. It was really nice. It's actually Flasso who performed that frightening ceremony at my grandfather's funeral of breaking the magic wand. They were really close friends, and also, I think, Masonic brothers.
Broken Wand. Max Katz, 74, of Brooklyn, New York, died March 31st, 1965, following a long illness. Survived by his widow, daughter, 2 sons, and 6 grandchildren, including Ricky Potash, magician.
Shortly before my grandfather died, one of the last things I remember him doing was getting me together with Roy Benson and having Roy teach me the billiard ball act, which was a great thing. I mean, this was a legendary act in magic, Roy Benson doing the billiard balls. A beautiful billiard ball act, which I did just for a short period of time. was much like Slidini, that learning from these people was a wonderful thing, but somehow I knew that I wasn't going to go out and be Slidini, and I knew that I wasn't going to go out and be Roy Benson or any of these other people, of Flasso or Carlyle, but there was something wonderful about learning both in general and also in specific. So there was a great discipline that came from learning the Benson billiard ball act. Most of these people that we knew, these guys who were the greatest guys in their field, didn't have a pot. These were not people making a lot of money. I mean, I've never stopped thinking about that. That people who were so good, they would bring tears to your eyes, tears of joy from the beauty of their performances, couldn't make money. My grandfather was Slidini's accountant. That was one of the things he would always point out to me, was how little Slidini made, so that I should certainly be interested in magic, but never think about it as a career. Of course, heeded that advice.
This week on Don Kirshner's rock concert, the incredible Kansas. Family funk from the Silvers. The outrageousness of the Sex Pistols. Some slick dealing from Ricky Jay.
What I'm going to try to do is actually penetrate this newspaper with a single playing card, going through the newspaper and knocking over the heavy beer cans which are on the other side. Watch. That's enough.
I don't often talk about my family, but when my grandfather died, that was the end of my relationship with my family. I was 16 or 17. It's safe to say my parents just didn't get it and didn't get me, and we had no rapport. And I guess it's also safe to say going from no rapport to wanting to get myself the hell out of their house happened pretty quickly, and I left home very early and basically never returned. Leaving with no money in my pocket and no job was scary on some level, but when you're that young, you don't think about that so much, and I quickly wound up getting jobs doing sleight of hand, and then I wound up tending bar in New York, even though I wasn't even 18 years old. You only had to be 18 to tend bar in New York, and so that became one of the first skills I learned. I ran away to Lake George, which was a big resort area, and wound up behind a bar doing magic and making drinks. And that's what sort of launched my professional career those days out of Lake George. One of my first jobs, when I was about 17 or 18, I played the Electric Circus in New York, the first psychedelic nightclub in New York City, where I appeared in between Timothy Leary lecturing about acid and the music act of the day, which was Ike and Tina Turner. Occasionally, the Chambers brothers were there as well, but sandwiched in between Tim Leary and Ike and Tina Turner was pretty great. Even though I tried to go to college, and I did go to quite a few of them, mostly to Cornell, I would leave at various times to go out and perform. But I remember performing on The Tonight Show when I was still at Cornell and living in Ithaca. It was kind of an odd thing to do, to go down to New York. I did that a couple of times and appeared on the show. And that was my first national television appearance, which happened when I was still very young. I mean, sometime around the age of 20, I suppose. And that led to other shows as well. And I wound up becoming a fairly regular performer on a number of those early talk shows, like Mike Douglas and Merv Griffin, and eventually Dinah Shore. She and I got along incredibly well. Probably was on that show 20 times or so.
The reason you're confused is you have a tendency to watch the black cards. Now, you should totally ignore the black cards. It's very important, if you're ever going to play this game for money, to ignore the black cards and simply concentrate on the red card. Now, I know this may sound hard to you if you're playing the game, but it's fun. All right, let me show you how this works. Now, here are two black cards, and here's the red card. Let me do this again. Remember, black, red, black. I'll do this once more. Red. Where's the red card?
Want me to guess?
Sure.
Right here.
Well, I was doing this for Elizabeth, but it just happened to, yeah, it happened to be right. All right. All right, let me do this once more,
Put some money on this one?
Well, I don't...
Put some money on it. What the heck?
Well, let me...
I'll put 50 bucks.
All right, all right. That's all?
50?
50 bucks?
Wow.
Hey, 51.
Okay. Okay. Now you're talking. All right, I'll do this quickly then. I mean, I'm not going to do it as slow as I did before. Remember, here's a red card.
Do it as fast
Here's a
as
red
you want.
card. As fast as I want?
Yeah.
All right, it's going to be fast. Where is it?
This one.
Is this what you're... Are you looking at this corner?
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I figured, and that's a good way to get the $50 back.
After some years of drifting around, I moved to California in search of the two greatest sleight of hand artists in the world, Di Vernon and Charlie Miller. So I had wonderful childhood influences. But when I came out to California, it was really different. I went from someone who just came out to reacquaint myself with Vernon to spending time with Charlie Miller and Di Vernon that it amounted to immersion. It was every day of my life, every single day, often winding up at the Magic Castle at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then going from there to Cantor's Delicatessen to 6 or 7, or going over to their homes. And it really was a complete and total immersion, and it was interrupted only by going out on the road to perform. I found Vernon at the Magic Castle in Los Angeles, where he had taken up residency. He was willing to divulge methods, although not always and not every time. This is part of why it was so exciting to be around him. There were other people who came out, really wonderful magicians coming from different places. Steve Freeman coming from Oklahoma, and Earl Nelson from Salt Lake City, and John Carney coming from Des Moines, and earlier Larry Jennings, and David Roth in New York. There were quite a few people. The measure of this man was that he made us literally uproot our lives without any, at least for me, without any plan to do so. I mean, you know, it was extraordinary. Vernon was thin and dapper and really good looking. I mean, from the time I spent most of my time with him when he was in his 70s and 80s, I mean, he had this wonderful shock of white hair and the most wonderful twinkle to his eyes, incredibly lively. And women just seemed to find him devastatingly attractive, even at that age. He was born in Ottawa, Canada, in 1894, and he got into magic at a very young age. The incredibly important event for him in his young life was he got a copy of Artifice, Ruse, and Subterfuge at the Card Table by S.W. Erdenes. Here is a text on card handling that most people thought was incomprehensible. They thought it was an engineering book. And at a very early age, using tiny cards, because he was just a young kid, he mastered this book, which is an extraordinary achievement. Later, when he came down to New York in the teens as a young man, he managed to fool people rather profoundly using the techniques from this book, and it really established initially his reputation. And from that, he had entree to the great magicians of his day, and he learned from them. He was avaricious in soaking up everything that he could find. He particularly spent time with people like Nate Leipzig and Max Malini. But also at this point, he was beginning to develop his own material and to really start thinking about sleight of hand in a way that no one before him really had. So this just grew and grew for years until he became the most significant and well-known figure in the art.
I'm 84 years of age, and I've been studying magic for 78 years. I wasted the first 6 years of my life, but...
What do you mean you've been studying it? Where do you study it? With other famous magicians or what?
You sit in a room and you take a pack of cards, or you take some dice, or you take a handkerchief, and you try to create some kind of a magical effect, and you work it out.
Vernon loved to play his acolytes off against each other. He was, you know, a feisty, sometimes even nasty fellow, although if you knew that that was the game, it was great fun. I mean, but, you know, he could frustrate you, and he also used it as a learning tool. You know, Vernon would be quick to tell you about somebody who did some move that he thought was unrealizable and really wonderful, and half the time he had just made it up to get you to think about it and do it yourself. But he clearly did show different pieces to different people, and you know, he really was like a guru, you know, a Japanese sensei. I mean, he used whatever techniques he thought were possible to get you to do your best stuff.
I can recall one thing the audacity of youth prompted me to do. He was always intrigued with the way that I could boomerang cards, throw out a card and have it returned to my hand. And it's not a particularly difficult sleight, but I did it with a sureness that he found interesting. And one day he said to me, I'll bet you can't do that 40 times, 40 times. Yeah, and it turns out that he said when he was a kid, he would practice this over and over again. And he said he could do it 39 times, 38 times, 35. He could never do this 40 times. And we were in a dark bar at the time, which I'm sure was part of his wager, you know, the fact that it was kind of hard to see. And he bet me an effect that had me absolutely baffled that I really wanted to learn. That he would do that against $100 or something if I could do this 40 times in a row. And so I then launched into boomeranging this card, and I remember doing it 39 times, and then I had the 40th card in my hand, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I threw the last card and caught it behind my back. And we both smiled a lot, and he taught me this piece, which of course I will not reveal to you. But that's why I say the audacity of youth. I mean, I have no idea why I was insane enough to risk missing learning this piece by catching the card behind my back. But I guess when one's in their 20s, they do stuff like that.
Ricky and I were both the hot kid magicians in New York. I was sort of an apprentice to Vernon, and I ran away from home, was on the road with Vernon when I was 14, and for something like 2 years. And Vernon could be merciless at taunting you with some secret that you were dying to know, and he said, oh, I'm not gonna say. You know, one time we were traveling, and he said, well, you know, I've been thinking about magic all my life. I said, yes, Professor, I know that. And he said, I think I figured out how to say the essence of pure sleight of hand in a single sentence. And I said, but I've decided I'm never going to say that sentence out loud. So, you know, then I'd start working on them. What was the sentence? And, you know, but we'd argue, and he, you know, well, maybe if you do this, you know, I'll tell you something. So, anyway, and he would never tell you. I mean, so he would get people infuriated and fascinated.
Vernon and Charlie
were different in that way. Charlie was much more direct. Charlie didn't like games in quite the way that Vernon did.
And now I should like the assistance of some gentleman from the audience. Doesn't have to be a gentleman, almost anybody will do. Would you? Oh, thank you very much, sir. Would you step right up here, please? All right. Thanks a lot. Don't be nervous. Think how I feel. Excuse me. May I relieve you of this?
Charlie didn't bluff. He just spoke openly and honestly. If you could get him to talk at all. I mean, he was far less likely to open up to people than the professor was. He didn't open up to me right away. It took a while, and so it should. Charlie was born in 1909 in Indianapolis and died 80 years later in Los Angeles. But he probably worked more professionally as a magician than Vernon did, in a variety of venues, from club dates to cruise ships. Even though these were the two great old guys of magic, there was still a big difference in their age. So Charlie was always the kid to Vernon. When he was 78, he was still the kid.
On the other hand, you know, I saw an inscription that Vernon once wrote to Charlie saying, "To the finest exponent of pure sleight of hand I've ever seen in my life." So ultimately, there was this remarkable respect and admiration, you know, for each of them. But particularly as they got older, they could be fairly cantankerous, you know, together. Charlie was inclined to work on the specifics of one particular move and the finest points and finest subtleties of this particular move. Spending 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day practicing, you can just get into a rhythm where it just feels so wonderful that you do it without really spending an awful lot of time thinking about doing it. And it's not the best way to practice. I probably learned from Charlie Miller more about how to refine practice. The concept of, instead of just getting into the rote and the rhythm and this wonderful thing of how nice it feels when you hit a move, you know, when you're working on your chops, to actually consciously try to make the move better each time you do it. Being in a room with Charlie and discussing a move is one of the stranger kind of pleasures I've ever had in my life. Charlie would bring up a move, and he would start to do it, and he would start to question it, and he would start looking at it from different angles. He would run to one corner of the room, and you'd have to do it, and then he'd run to another corner of the room. And it was this fine line between torture and absolute pleasure, because for Charlie, a good evening could be asking you to do the same shuffle 16,000 times, you know, and he'd be very happy doing that. And you'd be happy for most of it, but he always managed to take you over the edge where you just didn't want to shuffle the cards anymore. I mean, it was just endless, the variations and the craziness of it. And it was, you know, often, you know, as close to pure joy as anything that I can imagine. I really miss this enormously in my life.
I remember specifically one night, I was maybe 20, 21. We were both attending and working at the same magicians conference here in New York. I think it was at the Roosevelt Hotel. We were sharing a room. I was a young kid, maybe on his 5th or 6th trip to New York, so I stayed out a little bit later than Charlie did that night. And I came back into the room, and as I opened the door and the light kind of came through the crack in the room and illuminated Charlie in bed. He was lying in bed with all of the lights out, on his back, holding a deck of playing cards up like this. And he could not, even with night vision goggles, he absolutely could not see what was going on in there, but by touch, he was practicing something in the dark, in bed. Not really waiting for me, but just not asleep. And you know, it tickled me and it didn't surprise me all at once.
One of the things that I found so appealing in being able to spend time with both Charlie and Vernon was that they realized that perhaps the most demanding branch of all of sleight of hand was the artifice of the gambler, because of the idea that when these sleights and moves were done by people in card games, if they did them imperfectly, they were in danger of being exposed and therefore had their own personal health at risk. They became people who were extraordinary practitioners, able to do moves under fire, to do something under the closest scrutiny. And both Charlie and the professor spent the time to track down these moves and learn to do them incredibly well.
So a very large part of my training was involving the mastering of card table artifice.
What I'd like you to do, Ed, is just literally reach into the deck like that and cut a group of cards. And let's see, anywhere at all. You don't even have to put them down. We can just, oh, that's good. You've cut a deuce. But in a way, you've given me the perfect opportunity to show what a hustler could do. Because, for instance, if I could cut a 3, that might make you think I was almost as unlucky as you were. I can, by the way. But you see, and then you'd be inclined to stay in the game, right? You follow the concept here. Linda, I want you to do the same thing. Cut absolutely anywhere, and let's see what's on the bottom. We don't have to keep putting them. Well, it's another 2. just cut it up, and we'll see what it. Anywhere, cut anywhere at all. Okay. And let's see. This time you've cut a 7, which is a noticeable improvement in this game, anyway. So in this case, would it be possible for me to look through the deck and beat your 7 by cutting an 8? Oh, lucky me. Oh. So, you know, this is kind of the idea. Some people might call this hustling. But I've got to be honest with you. If we were playing for $80, I might want to take a chance and do this. If we were playing for thousands, I might want to try to cut an ace. I wouldn't be messing around. So you guys are really going to be the eyes and ears of the audience. I think the eyes will be particularly useful. And what I want you to do is watch me actually shuffle the cards and see that it's a good, legitimate shuffle. Because after all this shuffling, I'm going to do what gamblers call dead cutting an ace. The concept here is you reach into a shuffle deck and literally cut out an ace. This is an acquired skill. And please notice with me, both of you, that there are no dog ears or breaks or protrusions in the deck. And that once again, I'm going to break the cards as you might in a game. And once again, I'm really going to shuffle them and push them in. And once again, I'm going to actually try to reach into the deck and just be able to cut out an ace. In this case, you'll see there doesn't happen to be an ace over here or over here. I'm also going to try this left-handed, by the way. That's something I do in case someone breaks my right thumb. So let me try to cut an ace to the bottom of the left-handed. That would be the ace of hearts. Please watch me narrowly as I shuffle the cards. And this time, Linda, I'm going to give the deck a number of cuts. And while I'm cutting the deck, say stop at any point.
Stop.
Ed, be my guest. Thank you.
Well, good God. I'm gonna
It was divine. It was so wonderful. It was so different from seeing it on a tape, too.
Oh, yeah,
Just-
television, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Entirely.
Cameras, they should be avoided at all costs. They should.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
I was incredibly fortunate to actually have mentors with this direct link from people like Mellini that went back that far. The reason that I love Mellini is that he performed in the heyday of the most famous magicians, of people like Keller and Thurston and Houdini, but he performed entirely without props. He would literally walk into the houses of the rich and famous, that's where he would perform, and come in empty-handed and borrow a deck of cards, a handkerchief, a couple of coins, a piece of fruit, and somehow create miracles. I had done a Canadian show a number of times that I liked very much. And one day they asked me to put together a whole hour on magic. And I asked the professor if he wanted to come with me. And so we flew out. At one point, I asked him to talk about Mellini.
This may sound like a strange segue, but that reminds me of a very peculiar story the professor always used to tell about Max Mellini and a chicken. I don't know if you'd care to...
Oh, well, this is hardly... You know, people don't know what lengths a magician will go to create an effect. Now, I don't know how many people in the audience know, but if you take a chicken and you bend its head under its wing and you rock it in your hand like this, it puts the chicken into a hypnotic state. And in other words, for 8 or 10 minutes, the chicken is absolutely knocked out. It's in a hypnotic state. You put the head under the arm, you put the chicken's head under the wing, and you shake it like this, and the chicken goes sound asleep into a somnambulistic state. But this famous magician, Max Mellini, one time, he took a chicken and he plucked it alive. He plucked this chicken alive. He took all the feathers out, and he put the head under the, and he rocked it like this and put it asleep. Now he put it on a big platter, He put a lot of potatoes and garnishing around, and they put it on the table at a very fashionable dinner party in England with a lot of lords and dukes and different ones. They put it on the table. And all these very stiff people were sitting there waiting for somebody to carve the turkey. And somebody said, well, you do the carving. And he stuck the fork in the turkey, and the damn turkey jumped up out of the dish and ran the length of the table.
I'm going to show you a piece from right around the turn of the century, right around 1900. This was a piece developed by Max Mellini. The idea here was that more than one person would take a card during the course of an effect. So I've had a number of cards selected. I'm going to shuffle the cards and try to find those cards again. Actually, I have to confess at this point during the show every evening, I wonder what it would be like if I didn't find those cards. Just a thought. So, I'm going to find the next card by means of a simple cut. And that is the ace of clubs, the card the woman on the aisle took. Your ace of clubs. Your card was, you're shaking your head no?
No.
Ace of clubs? What was it?
4 of diamonds.
If you insist. I'm looking for a little sympathy. You give me nothing. Play the chill for me. Icy. No, fine. You took one, I believe. Would you be so kind as to mention it for me?
Jack of diamonds.
Jack of diamonds out of the deck into my hand as if propelled. Jack of diamonds. I'm going to try to find yours in the South American or karaoke fashion, if you'd be so kind as to name it.
Ace of hearts.
The ace of hearts. Let's see.
Oh.
Good. You haven't forgotten yours, I trust. What was that?
9 of clubs.
The 9 of clubs, the last card. Yeah, you didn't take one, did you? Were you? Oh, in the second row. What was yours, sir?
6 of diamonds.
6 of diamonds. Well, I'll have to find both of them. 9 of clubs, 6 of diamonds. You're 9 of clubs, you're 6 of diamonds. One day I drove up to the Magic Castle, and Vernon was sitting on the bench in front of the castle, as he was wont to do. And I said, "What are you doing, Professor?" And he said, "I'm watching people put on their sports jackets." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm watching people put on their jackets." It was a private club, and to gain admission, you had to wear a tie and jacket. It was a hot day, and so most of the people who arrived weren't wearing coats. And Vernon said, "No two people put on their jackets the same way." It was just fascinating. The two of us sat there for a very long time watching people put on coats. It was a wonderful lesson in naturalness and how you begin to understand that much of sleight of hand is the duplication of natural action when you're doing something that may be surreptitious. In terms of legacy, Vernon really leaves a record behind him. And Charlie, in his reluctance to publish or discuss or even share his magic with as large a community, certainly leaves less. But I think he's no less important. I think he really is equally important and equally remarkable. Now it occurs to me that people who are really good at sleight of hand will never have seen Charlie or Vernon. It's almost incomprehensible to me.
You know, ever since the first caveman, Wog, accidentally killed himself by swallowing flaming fire sticks in order to amuse his fellow cave persons, People have been looking for new and ever more original ways to entertain their fellow man. And never, I repeat, never in the annals of entertainment has one man devoted himself more dutifully, studied so scrupulously, and documented so diligently these eccentric, bizarre, and astonishing feats of physical and mental daring-do than the man they call America's scholar of the unusual, magician, author, bon vivant, raconteur, prestidigitator extraordinaire, and a personal friend to whom I no longer owe a favor, Ricky Jay.
I will not waste your time this evening with kumquats, pears, or prunes. No, no, no. Ladies and gentlemen, the most prodigious of household fruits, you guessed it, the watermelon. Out of season and dreadfully expensive. Watch as I try to penetrate the juicy, rich red interior of said melon with a perfectly placed shot from an ordinary playing card. Yats! 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 Why is he still doing this? Yats! Ladies and gentlemen, please notice that my last two shots penetrated exactly the same slit in the watermelon. A feat so impressive, I am forced to mention it myself. But I know what you're saying. You're saying, sure, you're able to throw cards into the rich red interior of said melon. But can you penetrate the even thicker pachydermatous outer melon layer?
Yes!
Of course not. Who could do that? But encouraged by your approbation, I will attempt to penetrate the even thicker pachydermatous outer melon layer. Watch, yes! This scares the melon. This wounds the melon. This ticks me off. It's my last card.
Ricky Jay was a student of mine at an Aikido school in Santa Monica, and he was just a very unassuming person. He wanted to study Aikido, and he practiced hard. He always did. Aikido at its higher level does a lot of, you might say, sleight of hand, because it's done very rapid, and it's done with movements that get their mind to fool them. Probably a year after he was there, we had a banquet, all the members of the school. Ricky asked two people to give him $1 bills. So we gave him the $1 bills, and he held out his hand, and we're at this dinner table. And he holds out his hands, and he takes those two $1 bills, and he puts them together back to back. And he starts folding them like this. And I don't know how he was folding them, but they just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller until finally his fingers were together. And then he went like that, and there was a $2 bill there, and the ones were gone. And he handed the $2 bill to somebody that time, and I don't remember who it was. But anyway, and after that, it's like, that's impossible, you know. And I kept questioning him and questioning him and questioning him, and I waited, and it was probably, I don't know, 2-3 months later. We had just finished working out.
Oddly enough, I was actually in the shower with the water running when a bunch of guys from the class came over and asked me to perform something.
I walked up to him, and I handed him two $1 bills, and I said, do it now, right? Just like that. And he looked at me, and he put those in his hand, and he goes, oh, Fred, I wish you wouldn't have done this. He goes, I'm not prepared. And while he's talking to me, he folds the two $1 bills up and does boom, and hands me a $2 bill. And I've kept this all these years, but that's the one right there. He handed me that $2 bill, and I was dumbfounded. I mean, I stood there for a long time. He went ahead and got dressed. He acted like I wasn't even there. He did the trick and handed me the $2 bill and just walked off.
As Stanislavski said about Chekhov, I beg your pardon, as Vakhtangov said about Chekhov, I'll say about Ricky, he's devoted to that theater which he alone sees. That is to say, he has the ideal of magic in his mind to which he's devoted his life, right? To teaching it, to perfecting it, to performing it, to researching it. The main thing about Ricky is you watch his hands. I mean, he's commented on himself, you know, if he's adjusting his tie or moving a fork. You don't know what the hell he's doing, but you just have to watch it. He's so used to making the audience get the idea of looking at his hands, what he does for a living, right? It's not that he wants you not to look at his hands, he makes you look at his hands. It's very, very beautiful. You do anything long enough, as an artist, the technique seems to disappear and it looks completely natural. You know, I've seen him do the same effect literally thousands of times from watching the shows. I'm always fascinated. I mean, I always said that the greatest, you know, anybody can get a standing ovation, but to get the audience to go, ooh, you make them forget themselves, you really got to do something.
With your kind permission, I'm going to show you an actual sequence of events from a 17th century bestseller called Hocus Pocus Jr. The idea here that I will cover the center ball with a cup and place one on top. Then I'll actually cover this and try to make the ball penetrate solid through solid, joining its mate below. Now that you know the sequence, why don't you follow it again? This time a ball penetrating through two solid copper cups. This method a personal favorite of Matthew Buchinger, the little man of Nuremberg. He was only 28 inches tall. The cups obscured almost his entire body. Look, that's enough for 3 balls to appear below. Matthew Buchinger had no arms or legs, but he did have 14 children. I first started examining earlier pieces, literally looking for material that wasn't currently being done and thinking, was there some way that I could make a piece that might have been 50 years, 100 years, 300 years, 500 years old interesting? And as I began to read the stories of these people, they became more and more intriguing. And then at a certain point, I became a collector of this material. The first serious discussion of false dice in English is in a book called Toxophilus by Roger Ascham. This is 1544. But one hustle, which they mention that I'm particularly fond of, is sometimes, even if you have false dice, if someone has a particular run of luck, you know, they'll win. They'll win money. And in a case where a gambler is winning and they have problems, they talk about switching false dice into the game, letting the honest gambler who's been winning roll them once, and then accuse him of using loaded dice and take his money. Now, this seems to me a remarkably modern concept for 1544. The question was I ever tempted to become a con man or a card shark? Yes.
And I guess the follow-up to that is, did you?
I don't think I'll accept the follow-up.
Could we look at the secondary image, Fitz? That looks great. That framing's really good.
I gotta tell you, these images look so good to me. It's just, I mean, it reads, you know, this is gonna read from the next building across the street. This
We're
is
selling
great.
tickets there.
I'm so happy with this.
Oh, thank God. Thank fucking Christ.
Go over here to Willard, the man who grows.
Thank God.
One note
it's
Winston.
so good. So relieved.
I've always been very aware of boundaries with him. I've never asked him how he does a magic trick. I mean, I've never had an in-depth conversation with him about his parents. We don't argue about things and haven't for our relationship that's been over 30 years, except about things where he'll disagree with me about the nature of somebody's character. And I'll say, well, I think, I don't agree. I don't think they're bad guys. And that'll piss him off. He has this enormous sense of you cannot cross the line. If you cross the line, you're a goner. It's not sweet. I think it's that magician's reflex of playing all the angles. It's all about control. He would never put himself in a situation if he's not in control. If you eat with him at a restaurant, his back is always to the wall. It's the way he lives.
We've both been kind of fascinated over the years by the similarities between dramaturgy and magic. It's the same thing. He says magic is using the mind to lead itself to its own defeat, right? And the same thing is really actually true of drama. What you want to do is you want to set up a proposition so the audience is going ahead of you, trying to figure out what's going to happen next, so that at the end, just as in a magic trick, it's surprising and inevitable. It's inevitable because you say, oh, yes, I understand. That's probably what would have happened. It's surprising because it happens in an unusual way.
It's always difficult to talk about how you create a piece. It takes me a long time to create material. Sometimes things take me years, literally, to do. But in terms of building a piece, I mean, that's something that I really do think about for live performance. I mean, that the excitement of a live performance is wonderful. But I think that magic at its best is even impossible in that situation, that for it truly to be magic, a magical moment, it has to be spontaneous. It has to be something that just happens, not in a stage show that's carefully plotted from beginning to end, but rather in a moment. Probably the most famous of those stories is about Mellini. That's what made his reputation, doing impromptu pieces. He would sit down in a restaurant at a meal, and he would be at the table for a long time, a number of hours. He never got up during the course of the meal, and eventually he would borrow a woman's hat, and then he would get a coin and he would spin it, and he would say lady or eagle. He would never say heads or tails. He would spin it and cover it with the hat. And when he lifted the hat, if the woman said lady, it would be the sign that had the woman on it.
If someone said eagle, he'd spin the coin again, and when he lifted the hat a second time, there would be the picture of the eagle on the face of the coin. And then he would do this a third time. He would spin the coin, and when he lifted the hat, there was no coin at all, but in fact, an enormous block of ice.
So it was 1995, and I'd come on an assignment from The Guardian. I'd heard that the BBC was making a film about this very extraordinary close-up magician, and I came to write an article about him. I came in after the BBC had already started, and basically it was very clear the minute I arrived that it was not going well, and that Ricky and the director in particular didn't get on very well. And essentially, the problem was the director was on at Ricky, as I remember it, to produce a particular effect. He wanted a centerpiece for his film. And the more he demanded it, the more Ricky resisted. The tension built and built and built to the point where the BBC and Ricky were really barely talking. In the middle of all of this, I think as a break, we went out to the Huntingdon Library to try and take the tension out of it. He seemed to be altogether in a much better mood on this day. I mean, we all noticed that. And Ricky said to me, come on, suddenly. He said, come on, let's go and have lunch, which was quite unexpected because he's quite, he can be quite cantankerous, Ricky. I mean, I think he'd admit it himself. He can be quite difficult. And so he said, get in the car, Susie. We're going to Sunset Boulevard. We're going to have a lunch together, and we'll do the interview. I got in the car. It was me and Ricky in the car. We started chatting, preparing, the interview that we were going to do. And we took the wrong turning off the freeway. And so then we had to find our way back on. And so a journey that maybe should have taken an hour or something from Pasadena, I'm not sure how long it's supposed to take, took double. And it was fantastically hot on this day. And I couldn't help noticing, even at the time, I thought, gosh, he's taking this all very well, for such a sort of irascible man. And so then we got to the restaurant, and it was the worst possible place for an interview. It was full at lunchtime. It had glass on two sides from floor to ceiling. First, there was a 20-minute wait for the table. And then we sat down at a table. Ricky was opposite me, and he was chatting away, and he started to talk about the tension there'd been with the BBC and saying, I think that he regretted that this had happened and how he very much wanted to do this set piece that Paul had particularly asked for, that had been performed by a 19th century magician, Max Mellini, at a dinner party. And he started to tell me the story of Mellini at the dinner party, the hat, the dollar, and so on. And as he was telling me this story, I think I became aware at that moment that he had his menu open in front of him. So he was partly concealed behind this rather tall menu. And as he was telling the story, he said, and Mellini lifts up the hat. At that moment, he lifted up his menu, and on the table in front of me, I think I'll never forget it. I mean, on the table in front of me was this huge block of ice. I mean, it was about a foot square. Really, I can't exaggerate. Huge block of ice that later, when I picked it up, I held with two arms. I remember I burst into tears, and I think that shocked him a bit, actually, because it was such a kind of violent reaction. I just sobbed. And he said, I mean, he can be very gentle, Ricky, in fact, for all that he growls a lot. And I remember he said, I deceived you, it's what I do for a living in this. But, he also, I mean, it's a moment I'll never have again. I'll never forget it. I mean, it was a kind of supreme piece of artistry that I witnessed that was done for me. I mean, that's what it felt like at the time. He had produced this extraordinary effect for me. I think I realized in that moment that this was, what we'd all been waiting for, in a sense. I remember looking under the table, there was no water on the floor. The sun was pouring in through these huge windows on two sides, and the ice cube was melting in front of me. I mean, visibly melting so fast that I knew, the ice cube could only have been on the table seconds before I saw it. It was the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen in my life.
Everything he does is teaching. I mean, the whole idea is the way you find a disciple in show business is you tell everyone, get the fuck out of here. Go away, I don't need you, I don't want you. And the kid who doesn't go away, and eventually you ask him to bring you a cup of coffee. It's the old rabbinic idea, I'll teach you anything, just don't ask me any questions.
Charlie Miller, one of my great heroes and mentors, said to me, there's this guy you have to see. And I said, sure, anyone, Charlie. And he said, well, he's 15. And I said, well, maybe I'll hold off then. I thought that didn't sound very promising. And Charlie said, no, you should meet Michael.
This was the thing that got me the introduction through Charlie to Ricky the first time. So there's a classic and somewhat mythical technique with cards that lots of people talk about, but not so many people do, where the notion is, and you're going to want to stop moving, the notion is really that you can take any card from the middle of the pack, say the 8 of hearts, and square up the deck, and then without doing anything, have that card on the top of the pack. And the question of, is that possible? And to have it look like you didn't do anything is the subject of much discussion. So I was 14 or 15 years old, and I did exactly what I just did there for Charlie. And the next time I saw Charlie, Ricky was there. So that was kind of how we met.
How do I make this a favorite, her Chris Ann's phone?
Touch her name. Good. She's now a favorite.
Great, thank you.
What you notice is first.
I have no idea how to work my phone.
I know.
The highest tech visual presentation in the history of man. I'm still a total Luddite.
What happens in magic that's so interesting is that Charlie introduces me to a 15-year-old boy, and we become friends. And perhaps on some level, Michael's been very interested in the magic that I've done. And now I would say we've reached a point where 30 years down the road, I'm really interested in learning from Michael and really do learn from him.
なんだって後でこの釘を動かそうと思っているんですからね。よしと。一つのカップをこちらに置いて、もう一つを釘にかぶせると、釘が消えて、この角に移動しましたよ。不思議でしょ？今度はこの釘を隠して、音が聞こえましたね。ほら。
だって刺さるわけないですよね。ほんまに抜けないんですか？抜けないんだもん。
I know for a fact that there's stuff, having known him now, maybe close to 30 years, that Ricky has not shared with me. And I absolutely have a lot of stuff that I haven't shown and shared with Ricky. And I think that's important. I don't think it's cat and mouse. I don't think it's meant to be withholding, because if there's something that one of the other folks really needs, that's the time that comes out. And I absolutely have had the look on my face, or I've seen the look on Ricky's face, where I'll say, or he'll say, here's, something I haven't told you about that might be useful in the other person's, just like, it's that dream that I think many people have had, where you dream you're walking through your house, but then you find a door in a room in your house that's always been there and you didn't know was there.
One of the things we do is to show our work in process to each other. There are only a few people in my life who I really discuss magic with on that kind of personal level. There's Michael, who I probably do it the most with because I see him more often and we have a company together. And there is also David Roth, who's been backstage in my show for years and years, who's an amazing manipulator of coins.
And Percy Diaconis, who's a remarkable mathematician as well as an extraordinary inventor of magic, and Steve Freeman, who's the quintessential amateur, the absolute lover of the art. And there's literally no one better at understanding and performing the most intricate sleight of hand beautifully.
I think I realized that because I left home at such an early age and cut off almost all association with it, that I've been really lucky that my friends have become family. I mean, I'm incredibly blessed with remarkable friends, and that's become the focal thing in my life. And then I actually found a woman who wound up fulfilling all of those needs and more, and having somebody that I married 7 years ago, and my wife, Chrisanne, who's just remarkable, a great friend, wonderful woman, and a very nice ending to something that I thought would probably never happen for me. This is a poem Shel Silverstein wrote for me. It's called The Game in the Windowless Room. Of all the games I've ever played, of all the hands I've dealt, of all the pots I've ever raked, from matchsticks to nickels to untold wealth, from the beckoning lights of the Vegas Strip to the Pittsburgh Roadhouse gloom, the most dangerous game I played with the man in that locked door windowless room. His eyes were yellow as the golden crown on the King of Diamonds' head. His teeth were black as the mustached Jack, and his mouth was bloody red as the crimson gown on the Queen of Hearts. And his hand was marked with the sign that's found on the hand of the Diamond King. And he smiled as his eyes met mine. And he said, "What a shame I've been watching your game as you fleece these witless fools. How would you do it a hand or two? My game, my stakes, my rules." A sealed room, no windows, no phone, an unbroken seal on the cards. No watches or rings or jaggedy things that can clip or chip or mark on a non-metal clear glass tabletop. No mirrors, no overhead lights, with foot-thick walls and just one door that's locked from the outside. For as long as it takes for one man to break, be it an hour or a day, would you dare take a seat when there's no way to cheat? Well, what could I say? So in the silent tomb of that sealed room, we both sat down to play. Well, he was no joker. He was an ace. And although I was the king of this pack, I knew the lady'd have to smile on me if I were to win all his jack. So we played for hours, or was it a week? I lost all track of time. And he won a few, and he bluffed a few, but the final pot was mine. "Well, I don't know quite how you did it," he said as I raked in his last buck, "but shaves or seconds or a frigid deck, it had nothing to do with luck. You're a hustler, a sharp, a mechanic," he said. "Now the real game's about to start." Here he pulls out his knife, and me with just this deck of cards. "Ain't it funny to learn how the odds can turn," said he, as he thrusted and flicked and fanned, but I dodged his blade and my 8 of spades knocked the knife right out of his hand. "Hell, I'll beat you to death with my hands," he laughed, and he raised a powerful fist, but my 5 of clubs left a bloody stub as it sliced his hand off at the wrist. "Yeah," he screamed, and he pulled a gun from his boot. Last hand, and the dealer dies. But my one last card, my ace of hearts, caught him right between the eyes. Well, that, I might say, was the game of my life. When the police did finally arrive, they found a windowless room, a corpse on the floor, the door still locked from the outside, and no one there but him and me, a classic locked room mystery. But where is the murder weapon? They search, but they can't find it anywhere. Oh, where can it be? Hey, don't look at me. I'm just playing solitaire.